In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to create a civil cell for an entrance, focusing mainly on the pavement structure itself. There's some special unique entities in this particular civil cell that I want to point out on the finished product before we continue. One is that one of the references that we're going to be able to pick is the back of driveway. And if you notice that it is being tied to an existing ground elevation at the end. And so we have a profile on each particular edge. So we have one here on the right edge, assuming the stationing increasing down screen. And so this has its own independent profile where it ties to the proposed edge of pavement at the beginning and it ties to the existing ground at the end. And then we have the same situation here along the center line as well as this edge. We also have a seam line that acts dual purpose. One, to close our terrain model for our pavement structure, and secondly, to act as a trigger when we add it as a corridor feature where the template will not draw anything beyond the edge of pavement. A couple of other unique features on this particular entry is the mainline edge of pavement is the only reference that we're going to use that requires an elevation. The centerline reference point of the driveway does not use an active profile, so it's simply a 2D geometry, as well as the back of the driveway does not use or require a profile. So the edge of pavement, again, is the only one that requires a profile. So let's take a look at how we construct this civil cell, which can be used for pretty much any type of driveway. And the unique thing that we're going to be learning here is how do we do this profile, where we tie to the proposed edge of pavement, and then we also tie to the existing terrain model. And so that's something very unique about this particular demonstration. So let's go ahead and start with a brand new file, and we will begin to see how to construct. Using the Bentley Civil Examples workspace, I've created a new file, a new DGN file, and I've set my active feature to draft DNC. And so the first thing we want to do is to construct a couple of reference lines that will be utilized for our placement of our civil cell. So to do this, we'll come over to our horizontal geometry and select our line between points. And we essentially want to have three reference lines. Our first one is going to be our main line edge of pavement. So let's go ahead and give that a meaningful name, mainline edge of pavement, for our reference. And so I'm just going to randomly pick a point in space. It doesn't really matter where this starts. And I'm just going to give it a distance. Let's just say 200 feet. Again, that's not relevant in terms of what we're doing with this reference line, because that's going to essentially be absorbed by the main edge that we reference it to. And so I'm just going to snap out in space somewhere. Again, that one you can randomly snap because those coordinates are meaningless. Then the next thing we want to do is draw a random location for the center line of the driveway. So we're going to come down here, and again, going to draw in probably just a couple hundred feet here as a reference. It doesn't really matter. And it's probably better if you don't make it a right angle. And so I'm just going to snap down here to place that second line. And then the last one we'll want to draw would be the back of driveway. So I'm going to go ahead and put a name in here. We'll say back edge or something like that. And we'll place it here. And again, I'm purposely not going to draw things parallel. And then I did miss the naming on this reference, so let's go to the quick properties, and I'm going to call this feature name, we'll call this driveway center line. And we'll say OK to that. And so now we have our three references, our driveway center line, we have our main line edge of pavement, and our back edge. Now we want to continue on with the construction of our geometry. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here. And we want to establish the driveway centerline construction element. This is our reference placement element. but we need a construction element because this reference element will be absorbed by the geometry that we place it onto. And so in order to maintain all of the rules, we need a construction element that is tied to this, and then all other elements would then be tied to the construction element. And that takes a little getting used to, but when you begin to think about the concepts and when civil cells are placed, what happens, it should begin to make sense. And so what we're going to do is we're going to select a feature. Under geometry here, I'm going to use the driveway center line. One thing to keep in mind here is you probably want to avoid using a feature that auto exports back to the GPK or to your geometry host file in making these civil cells. It just makes it a lot less confusing for the end user to use these. They can always go back and change a feature later if they want to after they place. So we'll have our feature set. We're going to come in this time and we're going to do a single offset partial. Single offset partial. We're going to offset this line, and so we can come in. I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call this driveway center line geometry. And we're going to offset this element. And then you see that I have the offset locked here, and I'm going to toggle through my locks. The one thing that you don't want to do is you want to avoid using station here in your horizontal geometry. But since we're going to be snapping to the intersection anyway, it doesn't really affect us in this particular design. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my intersection snap, and I'm going to snap to the intersection of these two reference lines and accept that. And then it asks us then, or prompts us to set our ending, and so we have a length here, and if I wasn't going to go to another intersection, I would want to change and use length. Don't use the end distance station because that's not going to work well. And we want to use, in this case it doesn't really matter because no matter which one we would put in, it would be overrode by the fact that we're snapping to an intersection here. And so we'll go to the intersection and we'll accept that location, and then we can exit out of that command. Now, one thing important to point out here is if you remember, this line was drawn from top to bottom, and I also drew this line starting here at this intersection top to bottom. It's always a good idea to stay consistent in your direction, whatever you choose, when you're dealing with two lines that are relating to one another instead of reversing one of them. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Now that we have our geometry established for the center of the driveway, which again is a construction line that's going to be used to construct the driveway, it'll be part of the terrain for the pavement. The next thing we want to do is change our feature over to edge of pavement and create those. And so we'll switch over here to roadway, and I'm just going to use road edge of pavement here for simplicity. And this time we're going to do a full offset. And so if I come over here to a single offset entire element, and we're going to pick our offsets, and we can mirror, that's fine. And then I'm going to call this our driveway edge of pavement. And so we're going to offset this line. So we'll accept that. We'll do a -10 and we'll mirror. And you can see that that worked. Now, here's the catch. What we want to do in this situation is we want to use the microstation trim command and have these lines end at the intersection with this back of entrance. And so all I have to do to make that happen is to create another rule here. And so we're going to go into trim element, microstation command, and we're going to select this and tell it we want to trim it to the back of driveway. And then the same thing with this, which would actually be an extend in this situation. And what that will do is no matter how the back of driveway is orientated compared to the mainline edge, it won't matter. These new proposed edges will stop at that location. The next thing that we want to do is we want to construct the fillet between this edge and our reference line. So we'll come back to our geometry and we're going to do a simple arc. And we want to put in a radius, and I'm just going to use, I think, a radius here of 10. Doesn't really matter. And we're going to come in to be consistent again. I'm going to pick my driveway edge first and my reference second and accept a radius, and then we only want to trim the back, and that's important. Don't trim the head. We want to leave this reference line alone. And then we'll do the same thing over here. And so now we have our geometry, our horizontal geometry, constructed for the edges. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to begin to start thinking about vertical. And so the first thing that we would do there is we need a seam line that is going to be placed here for the boundary of our terrain model. But to do that, we first need to establish vertical on the one line that it is going to be required, and that's going to be this edge. And so I'll select that edge, and we want to assign an elevation to that. Now, this elevation can really be anything, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to assign it a constant elevation here, and I'm just going to data point, and I'm going to assign it, let's say, an example, an elevation of 5. And so now we have this 3D profile established on that line. And so you can see that the active profile, if I were to open that profile model up over here, you can see I have a constant elevation of 5, and make sure that that is active, and it should be. So the next thing we want to do is we want to establish this seam line for our terrain model that essentially is a partial offset of this geometry, and it's also going to connect to each end of the fillet. So again, I'm going to change my feature, and underneath roadway I have one in here called, actually it's under geometry, I have one here called match line. And so now we have our active feature set, and this is going to be a single offset partial. And so I'm going to locate the element that we want to offset, which is the mainline edge of pavement. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a name called, I'll call it match line. And so we're going to locate our element. Now, the first thing we want to notice here is if I arrow over, I want to make sure that nothing is locked. And so we have offset that is locked, and I'm actually okay with that. I'm going to put in here a value of 2 just so that you can see me construct this. And then my start distance is actually going to be set by snapping to the end of my fillet. And so I'm going to snap to the end of the fillet and accept that. And so now you can see that I have my offset locked, and I'm locked to the end of the fillet, and I'm going to come over here and set my end distance. And again, arrow over, make sure I don't have my end distance or length locked in any way, and I'm going to snap to the end of that fillet and accept. And this time we do not want to mirror, so we'll say no to that. And then that particular line, because it's going to be utilized in the terrain, it needs to have a vertical elevation. And so that is why we set a vertical elevation on this reference, so that we could then extend that elevation information over to this. And to do that, we can come to our vertical commands, and we're going to say that we want to do a profile by slope from element. And the element that we want to profile is this match line. And so we'll reset because there's no other ones. And then our reference element is going to be here. And our percent slope to that element is going to be 0. And we're going to do all, and no adjustments and no offsets. And so now that is going to be set in our model. And if we come over here to our view setup, and we'll go to our 3D model here, and we'll do a fit view, you're going to see that we're beginning to establish, do a rotate view. We're beginning to establish our information here, and so you see we have our mainline edge, and then we also have our seam line. Now let's go ahead and change that offset back to 0 on our seam line, because we're done working on that. So I can just come over here to our center offset and change 2 to 0, and now that is consistent with the mainline reference line. The next step in the process is going to be to establish a profile and also to set complex. We'll do the complexing first for our edges. But before we do those edges, I want to go ahead and create a profile for this main line. Now, remember the thing that we wanted to do on the profile is we wanted to tie to the mainline edge of pavement, and we also wanted to tie to the active terrain model where the driveway ended. To do that, we're going to introduce a terrain model. So we're going to come in and draw a basic microstation shape. So I'm going to select shape here, and notice that I have area is solid and fill type is none. And you can establish, if you want to change your microstation symbologies here, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. So for what we're doing here, because this terrain model is really going to only be used in the creation of the civil cell, it doesn't get carried through when we place it. Just the rule does that it knows that the profile is supposed to connect to it. So I'm just going to draw basically the boundary here that I'm going to use for an active terrain. And if you remember, I set this elevation along the main edge to 5. And so let's go ahead and set an elevation then to that shape. So we go over here to our vertical geometry and set a constant elevation. We're going to locate this and we'll reset. And then let's say that we set this to an elevation of 1, just something off the ground so that we'll know that it's working, and we'll accept that. And so now if we look in our three-dimensional view, you see that that is introduced. And now we want to build a terrain model out of that. So we come over to our terrain modeling tools, and we're going to say we want to make a terrain model from elements. And so we'll locate, but before we do, I want to go ahead and just set my feature definition, verify its existing boundary, and my name is existing ground, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to use a feature type as boundary, and we're going to remove slivers. And so we're going to locate this element to add, and no more, so we reset and accept boundary and slivers, and now we have our terrain model. Now we actually need to set that terrain model as active. And so I'm going to come over here to my 3D view and select it. Make sure that you get the terrain model. So there's our terrain model. And we're going to set that as our active terrain model. And I'll come back over here and set view 1 as active. So now that that terrain model is active, I'm just going to do a file save settings here just to kind of save the drawing perspectives and everything. And the next thing we want to do, now that we have that active terrain model set, is begin to focus on setting our profiles. And so the first profile that I want to set is going to be along the construction of the center line of the driveway. Remember, our references are already taken care of. This one remains 2D, this one remains 2D, and then this one is the one that's 3D that we hard-coded an elevation of 5 to, and then that elevation will then get updated when we actually place the civil cell. And then we also set an elevation on our seam line, which was a slope of 0 from our mainline edge of pavement reference. But what we're going to do for these particular entities is we're going to make sure that each of these are tied to the edge of pavement, proposed edge of pavement here, and then they're going to be tied to the existing terrain model at the other end. Now, because we're going to be profiling and building a terrain model of this area, one of the things that we will have to do eventually is to adjust the stroking distance along each of these. So to get started, we're going to focus on the mainline edge first. And so let's go ahead and select this, and we will make sure that we have the proper profile model opened. And you can see all we show right now is the existing ground elevation and an elevation of 1, which is our active terrain model. And so we're going to design this profile now to start at the proposed edge, which we know is elevation of 5, and tie at the existing ground over here at an elevation of 1. So to do that, we actually need to project this edge into this profile view. And so we're going to come over here to our vertical geometry, and we're going to select the profile intersection point. And it says to locate the element to show the intersection on. Well, that's going to be our driveway construction line. So we'll select that. And then it says to locate which element does it intersect, and that's going to be our mainline edge. And you can see now that we have this purple dot representing the intersection of the centerline driveway geometry and the mainline edge of pavement, and that's going to be our snap location. And so what we're going to do is make the profile view active. And this series of steps you need to follow very precisely for this to actually work properly. And so I'm going to come in and start my command to draw a profile line between points. And my first snap is going to be to the circle. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, and I need to go to my origin snap and snap to the origin of that point and accept. And that is very important that that snap is done properly. Now, at this point, I need to enable Civil AccuDraw and also enable Profile Offset. Again, this order is critical for this to work properly. We're going to come down here, and now you can see that we're in this drawing mode. I'm going to do a fit view here just to kind of window out and go back to my command. And so the first thing that we want to do is we want to tab down to the Civil AccuDraw keyends, which is the station or the profile offset. Doesn't matter which one you're in. And I'm going to press the letter O on my keyboard, and it says to select a reference element or reset to return to command. And what it's really prompting us for is to select the existing ground profile that we want to tie to. So I'm going to move my mouse down and hover and then do a left mouse click to select. Now I'm going to tab to my profile offset and type the number 0 and press enter to lock. Then I'm going to move my mouse. Now you will see that I am tracking that existing terrain. Now the last part of this is to move the mouse back to the plan view while in the command. And I'm going to do a tentative snap to the end of my red geometry construction line. You must do a microstation tentative snap. So I'll do a tentative, and then I will do a left mouse button to accept, and accept, and then that now, and I can exit out of the command by hitting the escape key or F4 in the examples workspace or choose none. And now we have this profile that is locked to the main edge and it is locked to the active terrain model. And so if I select that, you should see that you have a origin snap here at the beginning that is at exactly station 0. And so if we look at there it is. And then the other thing that you should see is there are no snap parts here. You shouldn't see a little snap icon there. And then you want to, at this point, set that as the active profile for that particular element. And so now, if we take a look at how we're doing in our model, if I come over here and move my rotation point, you're going to see that things are starting to take shape quite nicely. Okay? At this point, we can toggle off Civil AccuDraw for just a moment. And that takes care of our profile for the centerline construction. Now we want to do each left and right edge. Now, because we're going down, I'm calling this the left edge, and I'm calling this the right edge. And so to make this seamless for the user, what we're choosing to do in this design is to complex the arc and the tangent. And so to do that, again, make sure your features are set. And so my feature here is going to be under roadway and edge of pavement. And then I'm going to call this right driveway edge. Tab out to accept that. Okay, so now we're ready to design this one. And we're going to come into our line between points. And we're going to snap to the origin. And we'll accept that. And then I'm going to hit O again, just like we did before. And we're going to accept that. And then we're going to tab over to our profile offset and hit 0 and enter to lock that. And then once that's locked, then we want to jump back to our plan view. And we're going to do a tentative snap and accept. And then you can see in our profile view that locked that in. And so we'll end our command. And then in our profile view, we'll set that active. So we'll select to set as our active profile. And I'm just going to go ahead and check the name here in the quick properties, make sure that looks good. So let's give this a, right driveway profile or whatever you would like to name it. And so we'll accept that. And we have our feature definition proper. And just to verify, if you select this, you can see we have our origin snap here, and we're snapping to our existing ground here. And then the end of our geometry will then control that. And then we want to do it one more time for the other edge. And so we'll select this one, and we will open our profile model over here. And then we will go to, I'm going to turn off Civil AccuDraw for just a minute while we do this. We're going to come over here to our projection again, and we want to show it on this profile, this entity, and so you can see that now got projected. And we'll come over again to our profile view, and then I'm going to go ahead and enable my Civil AccuDraw and run a line between points. And so we're going to snap to our origin of this point right here. Accept that. And then I'm going to tab over to my profile offset, hit 0, enter. And so you'll see that that's now tracking. And then we will jump over to here, to our plan view, and we'll do a tentative and accept. And now you're going to see that that's locked in to the end. And so we'll come out of our command. And again, lastly, we will make this active. And we have our origin snap here, and we're snapping to the end of our train there. And so everything looks great. And we should be then good to go. So that concludes the creation of the profile, and so now is probably a good time to begin our test. And so we'll turn off the Civil AccuDraw, and one of the things that you can do is as you wiggle this, all of your profiles should adjust appropriately, and it looks like they are. If I come into this particular line, or I'm sorry, the reference line, and I slide that up, I should see our profiles modify as such. And so I come over here and open another profile window just to check them all, and that's always a good idea to check all of them, make sure they're all reacting properly. And so you can see that adjusts perfectly. And then the last one to test here is the center, and so we'll open that profile view up, and again I'm going to touch this one and drag this up, and we should see that profile adjust, and it does quite well. So it looks like all of our profiles along our edges are set. We have the match line set here, or our seam line, and then we have our reference line here, 2D reference line set as well. Now what we're going to do at this point is we're going to make a train model using these boundaries. So it's going to be the seam line, this complex element, and this complex element are going to be used to make a train model, and they will be set as boundaries, and then we will add this in as a break line later, and then that will give us our top surface of our pavement, which is really the hard part of building this particular civil cell. But before we actually proceed to build the train model, it's always a good idea to adjust the linear stroking first to your desired triangle stroking distances. And so I'm going to go ahead and touch these 3D elements, the three of them that we're going to be, actually four of them we're going to be using, and go to the quick properties, and I'm going to adjust the linear stroking to every 2 feet. And remember, the tighter you make this, the longer it's going to take to process your model. So don't go crazy here. And then the stroking step method, you can set that to increment or equidistant. I'm just going to leave that to increment for now. And so I've changed this one to 2. I'm going to grab this one and do the same thing. I'll set that one to 2. And these can be changed later after you make the train model if you wish. But I've just learned that it's just a little bit easier to handle it right here. So we'll do this one as 2. And so that's all consistent now. And then we'll want to do this one, which is going to represent our break line, and set that to 2 as well. Now, you might be wondering why I established this as a profile that hits this edge, goes along this, and hits the ground. If you really think about a driveway design, it's going to be something more like probably this situation. And at the end of your fillets, and sometimes in the past we've come across and locked a constant slope here or here, and that's not really practical for a driveway design. A driveway design generally is going to be, pretty much a straight grade down from these tie locations. Now, you can always modify these profiles. Again, we're not trying to take the engineering practice out of this. And so after a civil cell of this nature is placed, you would always want to review each of the 3 profiles and make adjustments if you need to. So the next step in the process we want to do is to go ahead and create a train model. And so we'll select that, create train from elements. And what we're going to do in our tools here is it's going to be a boundary remove slivers, and our feature definition we're going to show as existing boundary. And this time, actually this is going to be a design boundary because this is going to be proposed pavement. So I'm going to call this pavement, and we're going to select our elements. We're going to do, it doesn't really matter which order, we're going to do this one, and we're going to do this one, and this one. And then we don't do this back one. There's no reason to do that one. It's going to end off just fine. And we're going to reset and accept boundary, remove slivers, and now we have that train model created. And then we want to add this break line to the train model. And so right now we're going to come to our tools again, and we're going to add a feature to our train model. And so we can pick it, in our drop down if we want to, and it's going to be a break line. And so we're going to locate the element to add, and that's going to be the center. And then we're going to reset, and it's a break line, and so now that's added. And so if we come over here to our model, let's go ahead and turn on, for example, our presentation, we'll go to a illustration mode. And so here it is, and then if we come over to that train model at this point, I'm going to select it, and if I select the train model and go to quick properties, I can come over here, let's say for example, and turn on design triangles, and then you're going to see how that looks really good. I've got the 2% or 2 foot stroking set for it, and everything looks pretty nice. So let's go ahead and change that back to boundary only. So we'll select our train model for pavement, and we'll go back and set that to design boundary. And so that's done. And then we'll go back to our active view. And the next thing we want to do then is we want to add a surface template to give our pavement train model some actual depth. And so to do that, we'll just simply select our train model. I'm going to do it from the 3D view. It doesn't really matter where. And I'm going to select to apply a surface template. And then what I'm going to do here is I can hit Alt down and navigate to my template library if I wish. In this particular case, I can pick it graphically. And again, I'm going to use this pavement concrete with aggregate base. So I'll say OK to that. I don't have a clipping boundary specifically, and so I'm going to say no, I don't want to select one. And then I'm going to accept the template, and then I'm going to data point to accept. And as soon as I do that, then I'm going to get this depth here for my aggregate. So you can see now that we have our surface set up for our driveway. So it looks good. Project Explorer. And so if I go down now to my train models, to my pavement, and I can right click on here and go to properties. And notice that in the, forgive me as I'm navigating here, going down to these particular entries, notice that there is a new option here, and this was added in the Select Series 3 enhancement to create linear features. I'm going to turn that on for both of those. And so I'm going to go down here to, we have the pavement concrete aggregate as well. And so we have those turned on, and that way when we go to create a terrain model from graphical filter, we can include the break lines under the civil cell, which is something we haven't been able to do before this maintenance release. And so that is important that we make sure to enable those before we create this civil cell. And so this is really starting to come together. The last thing that we want to do is we want to apply linear templates along this edge for our closure to ground. And so if we come over here, let's say for example we select this edge and we want to apply a linear template along that edge, so we'll select it, and then what we have to do then is use the Alt down key combination and pick what it is we want to close out with. And so, you know, whether it's a curb and gutter and tie slopes or whatever you want to create for this particular driveway, you select that edge treatment and just say okay to that, and then accept the template. And now this is the part where you got to really pay attention. Okay, you want to basically hit your Alt key to lock to start, and you'll see the little padlock there, and then another Alt key to lock to end to make sure that that's locked as well. And so we'll accept that, and then you want your side of your mirror. Okay, and so I'm going to do on this one, this side, and I don't have any external corners, and so this angle setting doesn't really matter, and then we will accept that. Now, because we have such a short radius here, we do have a bow tie situation that can happen. And one of the things that you might want to consider in your, and this may not happen when we actually place it, but one of the things that you might want to consider is in your linear template that you place in your fill slope, for example, you may want to have something with a greatest priority where it looks for like a ultimate tie line, or what Joe calls a go get it line in some of his presentations, where you can simply go draw a graphical line in your plan view, and if it sees that line added as a corridor reference, then instead of doing traditional fill slopes or cut slopes, it'll just go to that line and stop. And so that's a good way to eliminate things like these, you know, these bow tie examples. But what I'm going to do here is, the reason this is so messed up is I'm going to just change this to a little bit bigger radius, and we'll make that look a little better. So we'll change that to 15. And you can see that that cleans it up nicely. And then we'll do the same thing over here on the other side. I'm going to select this one, and we're going to apply a linear template to that. And again, it's going to be the same one. We'll lock to beginning, lock to end, accept our side, and we'll run that down. Okay, and so that kind of completes that situation. Now, a couple of things to think about before we actually make the civil cell here is parametric constraints. One of the things that may come into play, for example, if we go open up this template drop here, I'm going to edit that template drop. Take a look, for example, at the curb height. You may need to taper that curb height, for example, on like an ADA access requirement. So if I came in here to this point for the vertical, and you can see I already have a constraint in there called curb type 3 height, so we should be okay. But just pay attention to that, make sure. And so if I come over here to active templates, I can actually take a look at my parametric constraints, and you'll see that there's several of them in here. And here's, as you go down, you'll see where each of those are established. And so there's our curb height that we could then bring that down to 0 if we needed to. So that's basically the actual construction of the civil cell. And again, it's always a good idea to test it. I can come in here, drag this line down, wiggle my geometry. I should see things heal properly. It doesn't really matter what I try. I should not be able to break it. And so I'm just going to go and set this radius to something a little bit bigger here. And so we'll pick that radius, which is here. Let's set that to 15 as well. Enter, and we'll allow that to heal. Okay, so then the next thing we're ready to do now is actually create the civil cell. We've got everything pretty much the way we want it, and we want to create that civil cell knowing that we have 3 references. We have our driveway center line, we have our main line edge of pavement, and we have our back of driveway. And so we're going to go to our create civil cell tool, which is under our task again, civil cells, and it's going to be create. And we're going to give it a name, and I'm just going to call this I'll call it urban entrance, and hit enter there. It says locate the first reference element. Now before I do that, I want to give it a name. So I'm going to call this driveway center line, and we'll tab out, and then I'm going to locate that reference. Okay, and then the next one is going to be driveway back, tab out, and I'm going to hit this one. And then the last one is going to be main line edge of pavement. Tab out, and we will select this one. And now you can see everything is highlighted, and so we know that we've gotten everything properly, and so we're going to reset to complete. And then it says to locate any optional references, and you could at this point touch each edge and say I wanted my left and right edge to be optional references, but in this case I don't think we're going to go that far. So I'm going to do another reset to complete, and then we're going to accept the creation of the civil cell. Now, the last thing that I wanted to show you in this video is when you come over to Project Explorer and you come to the civil cell that we just created, one of the things that you can do is in your dependent elements, if you find your terrain model called pavement, which is here, and that should be the only terrain model that you see in your list, when you right click on that, you can add that as a corridor clipping boundary if you wish. And what that will do is not only make the pavement something that can clip, but everything connected to that pavement terrain can also act as a clip to the main corridor. And so I'm going to go ahead and enable that so that it knows if I choose to, I can have this clip out a corridor that I place it along. Now, you want to be careful with that, because if you do too many clips on a corridor, it can make it really slow down in terms of the processing. And so just be aware that if you can get away with not clipping, you want to try to do that as much as possible. And so this really shows a lot of techniques. It shows about how to create a profile along the edge, and where it ties to the main line edge of pavement, and it also ties to the existing terrain model. And you saw there were some very specific steps that you had to take to construct these profiles. We also showed how we complexed the radius with the tangent and then placed a linear template along there, and how we've incorporated the ability to use microstation trim elements, and so that our back driveway edge does not have to parallel our main line edge. And then you can see how tight our triangles are reacting in terms of staying inside the confines of their boundaries. So hopefully you will find that this video is very useful in terms of learning how to construct an entrance, and you can obviously do a lot of things with this, take this a lot further. One thing that I suggest is when you get to the point right before you place your surface template and your linear templates, to save that off as a base pavement civil cell. And by doing that, then you can make several copies of that and include different linear templates or different pavement designs. In other words, once you get your pavement boundary done and working, then you can take that copy and make several copies of that for however many numbers of driveways that you want to build, and then put the appropriate linear templates and surface template for the pavement structure on there, and make that part of it really easy, because you can see the last couple of steps were very quick. So that concludes what we have to do then to create the driveway civil cell.